what we want to look at is kind of where do you put your money? You lose control, you give it to somebody whom you don't believe has the best interest at heart, and yet we give them our money.
Can we solve all of the problems? No, because there's some things out of our control, but we can control some of the places our money goes, how we're financing things.
With all the chaos around us in the world right now, all the stuff happening, having control of your money and having it safe, two very powerful things. Infinite banking does that for you. Welcome to Wednesday Wealth Webinar. I'm Brian Fouts, one of your co-hosts today, along with Craig. Craig, your camera's working.
Craig Yenni here, and we're blessed to have Shauna along for the ride today as well, who also ran WTF today with Larry Steinhaus. So that was awesome.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's very cool. Well, cool, guys. So we got a kind of a cool topic we're going to be talking about here today with all you, because there's a lot of things going on around the economy, around the world, and I like how Craig put it. What'd you call it? The big squish?
Well, so the theme of the presentation today, I'm calling it the Great American Squish.
And so we're going to get into some of the things that are happening right now, talk about some of the things that are concerning a lot of people, and then also some of how you can get your money to potentially into other vehicles so that when this does happen, because it is happening, you can actually still build wealth, protect your money, all that kind of stuff. So, Craig, I know you got some slides.
Yeah, so we've got kind of the way the presentation is going to flow today, or the conversation. We've got some slides initially, and then we're going to kind of shift into some open discussion. And one of the first things I would like to do is just ask, who here is on for the very first time in terms of the wealth webinar? Just kind of wondering who's new to our community today. If you wouldn't mind just putting in the comments, that would be awesome.
Yeah. Lucy.
Or anyone new. Welcome, Clint. All right, Janet. Awesome. Barbara. All right, so it's awesome. We've got some newer folks. So what we typically do second time. So we've got a mixture. I sometimes call this the kindergarten class. I think the kindergarten teachers have one of the hardest jobs, because you've got kids that are just coming into the school environment, and some of the parents have taught their kids how to count to 20. They know all the colors, and then you've got some kids that are there just for the naps and the lunch. So we have a wide variety of things to talk about. But with all of that said, I'm going to go ahead and share out some screens here.
Mike says there's lunch.
Yeah, Mike, there's lunch. It should be in your refrigerator.
Or you got to travel.
We try to do educational things, but we also try to make them fun. So not getting squished is not necessarily a great thing. But as Brian and I were kind of talking about our discussion today, a lot of the things we're going to be discussing are squishing the Americans. We're getting squished financially. So we want to just kind of talk about some of that. And of course, we're looking for a lot of involvement from the community here as well. Before we get started, because a lot of times the things we talk about, we express our opinions and our perspective. So we just want to make sure we're covering all of bases. So I'm going to read the disclaimer right now. All opinions expressed by Chris Naugle, any castmates, that include Shauna, Brian, myself, the money school, or its members, employees, or contractors, are solely their own opinion and are not investment or personal financial advice. This content is for informational purposes only, and this information should not be relied upon for investment or other financial decisions. Nothing contained herein is financial, legal, or tax advice. You should consult with attorneys, accountants, certified financial advisors, and other qualified professionals before contemplating to make any investment or financial decisions. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's get into it. So for those of you that have been around the community for a long time, I see Tess and Mike and many others out there, Peter, you guys have been around the campfire a lot. You've seen this quote, and you've seen it many, many times. You'll see it in our videos. But this thing kind of hit me the other day in a way that it's never hit me. And we oftentimes use this as a quote to say that other people that don't do what we're doing are wrong, or they're missing the point. But when we look at this, the problem in America isn't so much what people don't know. The problem is what people think they know that just ain't so. And I thought to myself, is there something that I think I know that just ain't so? And so my challenge for everybody today, as we go through this and on, just think about the things you think you know and make sure that they are so. And so when you think something you're doing is right, do you ever question it? Do you ever kind of reconsider or read or dig into it? So that's the point I want to leave with you today. And I've been having some of those moments in my own journey in infinite banking and some other things too. I'm like, oh wow, I think I may have missed something here. Um, so anyway, just want to put that out there. Shauna, Brian, you have anything to add to that? I just wanted to kind of throw that out there to get started.
No, it makes sense. I mean, it's one of those things where you've got to understand that what you've been taught, what you've learned, came from somebody else. It may not have come from your own personal experience. So it might not be true for you. And yet we think that it is. And that's one of the things we've always got to retrain ourselves and understand that, what our subconscious has been programmed might not be reality for us. And that's where we say, have an open mind.
Yep, absolutely. I want to have a little bit of fun here before we get into the content. So when I talk about the Great American Squish, the real question is this a new heavy metal hair band? What is this Great American Squish? Now I may date myself a little bit, but back in the 70s and 80s, I was kind of a hair band kid. I loved all the hair bands that, head bashing, rocking. Does anybody know who this is? This is a real hair band. I just wanted to find out, anyone in the comments, any idea who this is?
I have
Oh
no
my goodness. Ellen comes in and just slam dunks it. Wow. Okay, so
I don't know
Linus,
who that is.
Linus, we can get you connected with some heavy metal, maybe some Poison, all these things. Well, for those that didn't know, I was going to give you some clues, but Ellen already nailed it. Cinderella. So this was their, some of their top playlist. Shake Me, Nobody's Fool, and then of course I threw this in just in case we really needed some help. So anyway, this is the band Cinderella. And so the Big American Squish is not another band, but it's more of a financial condition that we're in. So anyway, just wanted to have a little fun. Hope you enjoyed that.
I did. It was hilarious.
All right. So let's talk about the financial squish. Now, we can't be comprehensive in identifying every single thing that's out there that's squishing us. But I would say, and I think, Brian, Shawnee, you would agree, I mean, there's some big buckets of things that squish us financially. So before I start kind of talking about some of those, I'd be interested to know in the audience, what would be one or two things that you think are the big items going on in our economy? And it could be our country's economy, it could be our personal economies. What do you think are some of the things that are squishing us financially? I'm just kind of curious if you can put that in the chat for me. So Linus has got debt, the national debt, credit card debt. Lucy's got inflation, medical bills, government. And Ellen, I'd be interested in knowing, like, government, what aspect of government, the Fed banks,
Fed banks, yeah.
yeah,
Federal Reserve.
yeah, Federal Reserve,
We'll be talking about that in a moment here for sure.
high prices, goods and services, groceries. And, the interesting thing is a lot of these things, insurance, I kind of look at my own specific situation. The county I live in, our property taxes just this last year went up 40+%. And for people on fixed incomes and other things, sometimes it's really hard to absorb those types of things. And not only that, I was on my morning walk today. I'm like, wow, the property taxes went up that much. I just got my my yearly quote for the homeowners insurance, and that went up significantly. I was like, yeah, we're getting squished. Things are just getting more and more expensive. So some of the big buckets, I mean, we collectively as a group did a great job. I think we've hit on a lot of these, and Clint's talking about insurance too, up 70%. So it's just everything is kind of coming down on us as the American public. And so the big buckets that I've kind of identified is the inflated money supply. And Ellen and others, and Clint, you talked about the Fed, the government. There's something going on where our money supply is getting inflated. And that's one of the things that's causing some squish. And we can get into that in a little more detail. One of the things I was kind of thinking about in this squish is not everybody's in this bucket, and it doesn't make sense for everybody to be in this bucket. But I think there's a large number of folks in our country that focus on investing before saving. And I can just kind of tell you my quick story. You know, many years ago when I got out of college, electronics engineering degree, going to my job, you sit down with the HR people, like, hey, we got this thing called a 401k. You can put all your money in it and squirrel this money away for the next 30, 40 years. And then hopefully you build this accumulated pile of money that you can draw down and worry about running out of. So my whole thing is there. It's, you know, I had college debt to pay off. I want to get a home and all these other things. So to me, I wanted to save some money before I got into investing. And I kind of felt like the 401k was more of an investment strategy. So I think a lot of people put money into investments before they have that savings. We've also got the fiat money. So Brian, how would you describe fiat money?
Fiat money is basically money that is backed by the promise of the government. So there is nothing tangible that backs up fiat currency other than the government's promise that that dollar is worth something. Fiat money is, I call it BS money. It literally has it's only worth the paper that it's printed on.
So
Yep.
Brian, do you see what that is?
Yeah.
This is $1 million bill. And I carry some of these around in my wallet just for fun. So if I was the king for a day, or say I ran, you know, we're in some sort of dictatorship, and I came through and I said, this $1 million bill is what we're going to, you know, use as our currency going forward. And I've got a whole bunch of them. I'm just declaring that this is now our money system, and it's not really backed up by anything other than my kingdom. So that's kind of where this whole fiat money idea comes from. It's just someone declared that this thing is worth something.
And by the way, fiat money is a system that has been in the works for over 100 years by, in my opinion, very big players behind the scenes as a way to gain control of the populace. So
Yeah, and
there you go.
it's all related. Not that we're going to be talking about some of those things, and it's not to be conspiracy theorists. It's just kind of laying it out. It is what it is, and so you've got this money that's been declared worth something that's not really backed by anything. Of course, we've got the full faith of the government behind it, but
Woohoo!
that's where the money comes from. And then we've got the fractional banking system, which really where this comes into is when we talk about inflated money supply. If we go and deposit money into our banking, you know, our bank accounts, you know, we put $100 in there. Well, the banker's like, hey, this is great. I only have to keep 10% of this, and I can go turn, you know, I can go loan out 1,000. So there's another point in the system where we're creating more and more money out of thin air.
And that's what creates inflation, by the way. So you think that the government prints money out of thin air, as Craig said, $100, gives it to you in the form of a stimulus check. You put it into the bank, and the bank turns around and lends you $1,000. So
Yeah.
essentially, that $100 out of thin air turned into over $1,000 of thin air. Literally, that is the cause of inflation right there. Pretty scary.
Yeah, the last thing I will talk about today is what's called the human conditions, and I'm really pulling that out of Nelson Nash's "Be Your Own Banker," which we'll touch on some more of this. But so of all the things we talked about earlier with the government, insurance, you know, cost of groceries, all these things are squishing us, but you know, these also are all related. There's government interaction, there's the Fed interaction, there's our own issues that we have as human conditions. So let's dig into some of this some more. And so the first place I want to go, I know we don't use a lot of coins and dollar bills anymore, but has anybody ever thought of what those little ridges are, those little reeds that are on the side of coins? Have you ever thought of what those things are and why they're there?
Or
Anybody
actually
out there?
more to the effect of what time in history did that actually come from?
Yeah.
It's a cool story of why that actually came about.
Mhm.
And we do it now just as a symbolic thing, by the way, but
Yeah. So it's interesting because as Brian mentions, it actually comes from a historical point of view. And, you know, if we go back to the Roman Empire, you know, Caesar had this huge army. He had a lot of expenses, and kind of what started happening at that point is you had your gold coins, and if you shave a little bit off, guess what you can do? You can turn one gold coin into many gold coins. And so this was just a way of debasing the currency. And course, the first people that do that are the ones that benefit from it, and then everybody else pays the price. Because if Brian's going to sell me a loaf of bread and I'm going to give him a gold coin, and all of a sudden Brian starts weighing things out, like, hey, wait a minute, Craig, your gold coin is not a gold coin. I'm like, really? So now I've got to put 2 gold coins in to get that loaf of bread from Brian. Well, that's kind of considering we expanded the money system, we created inflation, and I go to work, I'm a wheel builder over at the horse cart station, and I get 1 coin a day. Well, that 1 coin might not be enough to buy a loaf of bread. So that's kind of been the problem. But like Brian said, these reeds or these ridges on the coins were put in place to prevent the shaving of those coins. And it's purely symbolic now because, as you know, we don't have silver coins, and now it's just all these impurities. So they're just kind of it's just there as a symbolic perspective. And some people say even it's useful for the blind, where they can kind of feel around and see what kind of coins they have. But anyway, that's one way to create more money. The next way to create more money is this magical thing called fractional reserve. You go put $1 in the bank, and they whip around their magic wand and create 10 more dollars out of it. So my question isn't this the same thing as kind of shaving the gold coins? Aren't we shaving gold
Yeah.
coins to make more money?
How do you
And
think banks get into trouble?
exactly what you said about the other one is it only benefited the first people who did it, and then it made a problem for everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so this is one of the ways that banks get into trouble, by the way, is they do this thing where they over leverage themselves all of a sudden, bam, they get into trouble when things go south. There's a reason why, and not to come full circle, but why we talk about another strategy where they don't even allow this. And so this is one of the biggest problems I think we have when it comes to inflation, when it comes to debasing the money supply, is fractional reserve banking. And by the way, this is not just something that's in the US. Most countries have fractional reserve banking rules where they allow a bank to take $1 in and then lend it out 10 times. It's a problem in lots of economies.
Yep. And it's just to me, whenever I dig into this stuff and I look more into it, it's like, how did this happen? But it's here, it happened, and this is one of the big reasons for the squeeze. And it has a lot of relationship to all the things we talked about, where county taxes are going up and the price of bread goes up and all of these other things. So now, what are some of the impacts of inflating the money supply? So we've already talked about some of these. It takes me more coins to buy bread from Brian. It debases the currency and devalues it, so that gold coin is no longer pure gold. It's got impurities in it. It's just not worth as much as it used to be. And Brian hit on this earlier about the control aspect. So whoever is controlling the printing of this money, so they're not physically printing the money, they're doing fractional reserve and all these other things, but whoever has that control really has the control over society, don't they? So if you're putting your money into that system, you have less control than they do, because they're the ones kind of running the story there. But I mean, I think we could create a wealth webinar just about this particular topic and talk about it for 2 to 3 hours. So
yeah. I even have a presentation I do that's all about the money supply, how fractional reserve banking came out, fiat currency, etc. It's crazy. Yeah, default currency has its privileges, correct. And that's, by the way, if you think about the history of money here in the US and stuff around the world, how did everybody get into fiat currency? Well, guess where it started? With obviously the standard money, which was the US dollar, by the way. So the US dollar essentially forced most countries to go onto the the fiat currency system. There's a whole history to it. It's really crazy, but yes, default currency, as Clint said, has privileges. Oil, yeah, oil.
So the other thing we had in there, in terms of the squish, is what I'd kind of classified as investing before savings, and kind of shared with you my own journey of when I got my first W-2 job, and they're talking about put your money into this program that locks it up, and to me that was more an investment. So it wouldn't really allow me to cover emergencies if they came up, or if I needed capital for an opportunity, if something came up and Brian had an opportunity, we could partner and go make some more money. but one of the bigger things I would say, as I was kind of starting out, it didn't really allow me to build a financing system, kind of building my own banking system or having the cash that I needed to do the things I needed to. I'd have to go to somebody else and borrow, whether that's through a credit card or bank. So there's a lot of reasons why we would want to think, have we saved before we invested? And I know in this community, there's a lot of people that are far beyond, this point. Some people are starting out. And so it's just more of a principle. If you think about, do we have the capital saved? And do we have that emergency fund? Do we have a way to build our own financing system? Because that's where it all starts. Have we done this? When we don't do that, we have more ability to be squeezed, I would say. Has anybody here, and I'm sure many of you have in fact read the book by Nelson Nash, Becoming Your Own Banker. Can I just get a kind of in the group an I, for those that have read it? Linus, I would be shocked if you had not. So several times, and so it's really good in that book because Nelson Nash is talking a lot about what we've covered here as well. And I'm going to share some other books. And Mike's being a funny guy, Nelson Nash. And he talks about the human conditions. And he kind of breaks them down into these 5 conditions. One's Parkinson's law, which talks about things like once a luxury is enjoyed, it becomes a necessity. And I was kind of thinking about, I've still got my car that I built in high school. It's a Camaro. It's got the crank windows. And I thought to myself, the first time I was in a car that had the little button you could push and the window came down, I thought, well, this is really cool. I'd like to have, a push button window, but I still have a car where you got to crank the window up and crank it down. So some people experience a luxury and then they feel it's a necessity, and that kind of gets them in a trap where now you have to go out and borrow to get that. There's no delay in getting that thing. You want it now. I think the biggest one that really resonated with what I see out there is the expenses rise to equal income. So think about every time you get a raise or a bonus at your job, well, you're going to go out and do something with that: bigger vacation, bigger house, nicer car. And so expenses and income are always just kind of ratcheting up, and you never really build a difference between those and live, beyond, you're always living beyond your means there. So that's the first law. And Nelson Nash talks about, we really need to identify these things and then conquer them and not do them. So we need to not have expenses rise to equal income. We need to delay gratification sometimes on those luxuries. The second one is Willie Sutton's law, and Brian's going to be going over some of this type of some of the investments that kind of apply to this Willie Sutton's law. Who knows Willie Sutton? What was Willie Sutton? He was a notorious bank robber. I don't know if you've ever read about him, but he was well known for doing an interview, and somebody had interviewed him and said, "Hey, Willie, why do you rob banks?" And the reason he said he robs banks is because that's where the money is. Now I thought, well, that's a good reason to rob banks, is that's where they keep the money. But I don't know that they necessarily do that now. But Nelson Nash took this principle and said, wherever wealth is accumulated, somebody will try to steal it. And so that's the principle. We need to be thinking about, where are we putting our money? There's nothing that's 100% perfect, but where are we putting our money, and what are the different ways people may steal that money?
And by the way, the word steal, they might be doing it legally. I'll be honest, what do you think happens when a market crashes? Does that money just disappear? No, it just gets transferred. Yep.
So yeah, it's interesting, Brian, because maybe it should say, wherever wealth is accumulated, someone will try to, I don't know, transfer it to another place. I mean, it's really,
we talk about the wealth transfer, like the big wealth transfer. Wealth is always being transferred. It just happens faster at certain times in the the economy's life cycle.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that it happens is through inflation.
Mhm.
Inflation is literally stealing your wealth.
Yeah.
Banks literally steal your wealth. The Wall Street, 401ks, all these things are sucking away wealth. Although we think that it's the opposite. We think, hey, I'm going to put this in here and it's going to build wealth. Not saying it doesn't for some people, but essentially, why does a 401k exist? We'll get into that in a little bit more, but it makes other people very wealthy.
Yeah. And then the next one, the golden rule, is kind of a play on, the golden rule that most of us know is from Matthew 7:12, do unto others as they'll do unto you. And it's kind of, a biblical rule that we're taught as we're kids. But what Nelson was expanding on here is that whoever has the gold is going to make the rules. So again, if we go back, it's all about control. So when you have money, where are you putting it and who has the control? So that's the premise there. We touched on this earlier with the Will Rogers quote, the arrival syndrome. So as soon as we think we know everything, and I'll be the first to admit, I don't know everything. I mean, there's a lot of this stuff that I'm still learning and digging into. I've been studying it for years, but as soon as we think we know everything, we don't continue to learn. We don't look around. We don't analyze or ask questions anymore. So all of these things we need to be aware of. So whenever you're doing something, ask yourself, why am I doing this? And maybe you need to do some additional investigation. And then the last one, of course, is use it or lose it. And this is where it comes into when you have a plan or you have a financial plan or you have a path that you're trying to take. It may not happen overnight. It may take 5 years, may take 10 years, whatever it is. But if we don't have the discipline and the vigilance to carry out that plan and we don't do the plan, then we can lose it. And I also kind of look at this as kind of how money flows. If we have money flowing, and Brian and I were talking about this earlier, I loved your analogy of like a bucket of water in the desert. And let's say that that's your retirement, your bucket of water in the desert, and you're just going to have to drink that for the rest of your life and hopefully that bucket of water doesn't run out. Would you rather have that or be standing in a moving river, or more of the cash flow model? So, but Brian will share some more about that. But we were talking about that visual earlier. I'm like, yeah, it's really cool. So take a picture of this for those that, especially for the folks that are kind of new to our community and in the campfires, we call it. These are some foundational key books that you don't want to just read once. Like Tess was saying, I've read, the Becoming Your Own Banker multiple times. I've personally had that book in my library for over 15 years. So read all of these books multiple times, think about them, go back and read them again and do it again. And like Shauna says, audiobook, YouTube, I mean, there's all sorts of different ways to consume content. But the Nelson Nash book is going to cover, how the whole infinite banking process works. In the how privatized banking really works, you're going to get into what's known as Austrian economics. They're going to talk about fractional reserve, a lot of the problems. And it's not just to highlight the problems, but what can we do as individuals to change that picture? And then Chris and Brent wrote kind of a supplement, if you will, to Becoming Your Own Banker that then expounds upon some of the process. So these 3 books are key. There's a lot of really good books out there, but I would highly recommend reading these, think about them, and read them again. So I'm going to jump out of the slides for just a minute, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the economic status that we're seeing here. Do you know about the website? It's called FRED. It's the Federal Reserve Economic Data. It's just interesting because there's a lot of different tools here, a lot of different graphs, a lot of different visuals. If you're not aware of this, you might go out there. If you're kind of a numbers and like to see trends, and I know Brian loves this stuff too, like go out here and kind of see what's going on. And one of the graphs I pulled up for our conversation today was I just wanted to see from the Fed's perspective, what is their balance sheet look like? What's their total assets look like? And so you can kind of, narrow in on different time periods. But what was really concerning and should be concerning to all of us, we've talked about the expansion of our money supply. And if you look at what happened here, the Fed assets were around 3.7 trillion. And after 2020, we see this huge, never been done before growth of the money supply. Folks, this has not happened before. So all of the people watching this are saying this is going to be, there's going to be something hurt, that's going to hurt in the future. And I think that's what we're all experiencing with this squish. The taxes going up, the cost of bread going up, the gas, all these things. It's really very highly related to this big old chunk of money that's now, been created in our economy. So somewhere up in the tune of $4+ trillion was created out of thin air. Poof.
Yeah. And by the way, the consequences of that happening takes years, by the way. It takes years, in my opinion, to feel the full effect because it's crazy how slowly that money does get into the economy. It takes time. But one of the more common ways that it does get in the economy is through lending. Small Business Administration lends out to businesses, which then goes into the business, then goes to employees, etc. But where does that money end up? In banks. It almost always ends up in banks, which then the fractional reserve banking takes over and
Creates
perpetuates.
more. It's like this perpetual thinner money creation machine.
Yeah. So it's yeah. So it takes a long time to see the full effect of that, and I don't think we've seen it yet.
Yeah. And so, spend some time out on this site and you can query for different graphs, and then they typically have some sort of explanation, and I'm not an economist, but the next graph I wanted to go over, which is very concerning, is it's really a picture of consumer debt, so consumer loans, and this consists of credit cards, revolving loans, commercial bank loans. So it's really looking at what does that look like in comparison to the savings rate. So I'm going to go back and look at the max here, because I think if we take a walk back in time and we go back into the 70s, I'm kind of scrolling over this line, which is representing the savings rate. And we're seeing that somewhere in the 12, 13, 14%. So in the past, Americans were better savers. I mean, I think you can look at this graph and say, are we better savers now or in the past? And we can clearly see that in the past we were better savers. And where were people were putting money in safer places. They, had, different saving strategies. But as we go through time, we start to see this slow degradation of savings. And when I look back in history, and there's a lot of stuff that happened in this time period. We started seeing the introduction of the 401k. We started seeing tax laws change, where loopholes, as they call them, were getting closed on real estate investments. We saw capital gains taxes going up. And of course, in 1987, we had the stock market crash. So a lot of those could be reasons why savings was dropping. But I want to fast forward over to this this time period here. Actually, I'm going to go back to, say, the 5-year. And what happened here? So we see that there's this huge savings rate, never been seen before. And it kind of it just like shocks me every time I look at it. Personal savings was at 32%. Anyone have any idea why that went up so high? COVID. Oh yeah. And what specifically about COVID? What would be some things about COVID that would cause this big old spike? So just people, perhaps getting sick, lockdowns. So they didn't have anywhere to go to spend their money, perhaps, would be one thing. But what else was happening there? What did you get in your mailbox?
Fake money, monopoly money.
So monopoly money was showing up. So here's kind of the combination of the two is you were getting, the government was handing out these checks, all these stimulus checks. Awesome. Yeah, we're starting to see those. So the stimulus checks are coming in. We don't have anywhere to go spend it. So guess what? We're going to save it. So that made a lot of sense. So that's what kind of drove those behaviors. Now, as things started opening up, what happens? Like, oh, I'm flush with cash. This is great. Have all this pent up demand. I'm going to go out to eat. I'm going to travel. I'm going to spend some money. And so the trajectory we're on is very concerning and very dangerous to me. If your personal economy looks this way, that it definitely needs some help. But we're now seeing consumer debt well over $1 trillion.
Yeah. And
$1 trillion.
And the scary thing here is that the savings rate went up and then came back down very fast because we were short-term saving. But what happened is the longer term effect of that money being printed and then being saved is that now we're seeing the effects of that, because that was a short-term influx into the system of money, but it didn't last very long because of the influx, our dollars are worth less. That dollar in 2020 doesn't go nearly as far as it does today. So now you're seeing the effects of that stimulus. It's rising debt. Very scary.
So, as time goes on, I think we'll continue to see this divergence, but it's a very concerning trend when you look at what's happening to people. And we've got the Parkinson law. People are spending, way beyond what they should be. They're taking on a lot of credit card debt because as things get more expensive, maybe the income's not there.
You ever feel like you don't have control of your real estate business or your money? That's right. The big banks and the institutions, they're in control, right? I know you've felt that before. Private Money Club puts you back in the driver's seat. As members often tell us, it's a total game changer. Join the community of like-minded lenders and borrowers by going to privatemoneyclub.com and sign up.
When I think about investing, I kind of think of that standard bell curve, and this is just kind of a generic thought process, which is when you look at investor behavior, there's always going to be the higher performers. If you look at the stock market, you'll have the Ray Dalios and the Warren Buffetts, and then you've got all the people down here that just totally do the wrong thing over and over and again. And then there's some sample of people that kind of fall in the average side. And I would think with investing, a lot of this is probably even more below average performers than there would be above. But anyway, when we're making decisions in anything we do, let's take crypto. Where would you fall in crypto? I'd probably be down here. I don't really understand crypto. I'm not a big crypto fan, but there's people that are high performers in crypto. So this goes back to not only understanding the investments that you're getting into, but what do you know, like, and understand, and do your best to be up in this sample of people versus this sample of people. But unfortunately, I think most people fall somewhere on the below average in investment strategies. So with all of that said, there's some different forces working against us that we need to be aware of. And Chris talks about this often, about the sequence of returns, the drawdown effect. And if we just look at a portfolio and don't take into consideration fees or taxes, take a screenshot of this. This is kind of what you need to gain when you see a loss. So if we experience 30% loss in the stock market over some period of time, and this doesn't even take into consideration the time value of money, but at some point we need to gain 43% just to be able to get back to where we started. So a lot of times when we're looking at mutual funds or hearing about, Dave Ramsey talking about, hey, just put your money in a mutual fund for 12% and you'll be rich. A lot of the things are being considered on these drawdown effects. How long does it take to get back to, to where you started? So I just want to share some visuals with you. And what you're looking at here is just taking $100, putting it into, say, an investment, and let's say year one, it doesn't make anything. Year two, we drop 10%. In order to get back to that, close to that 100, I need about 11%. Now, again, all of this is without paying taxes on gains or paying investment fees, and we pay investment fees whether we lose or win. So just kind of showing the effects of a 20% drop, we need 25% gain just to get back to the $100. A 30% drop, we need 43% just to get back to the 100. So you can kind of see what's going on here. Now, what I like to do is not only look at kind of the ups and downs, but I take this whole sample of ups and downs, and if I average those out, would you believe that that's 6.4%? So when you hear, hey, I got an average 6.4% return on my $100 I put in year one, well, I have $100 in year 15. So average returns are kind of funny math as well. So we need to always be kind of looking at what's behind the scenes and kind of do a cumulative return, not necessarily an average return.
Yeah, and this is also a topic I have with a lot of our clients on, when they're talking about infinite banking things, because they're saying, well, if the market's making 8%, why would I not put your money there? It's like, well, what time frame are you talking about? And what's the actual rate of return? The question I always get is, what is actual rate of return? Isn't that the return I'm getting? Like, no. Average return and actual returns are two different things. Guess how 401k providers report returns? Average rate of return, 6.4% right there. But what's the actual return that person got over those 15 years? It's 0. Like that is scary math, by the way.
Yep.
And so when people say, oh, the average rate of return on the mutual fund is 8%, what's the actual return? Like what's the actual return you get on your money? Because how many people have looked at a 401k statement or any other vehicle tied to the markets and look at it and says, you know, they're saying that I've got 8%, but that sure doesn't seem to make any sense when I look at this piece of paper right here. That's what is happening. It's creative math. Yes, yeah. Teresa said funny math,
Funny
creative
math.
accounting. It's scary.
Yeah. So, to that point, I want to share this next one with, and oh, before we go there, the fees that I'm going to be talking about, I'm not just pulling this out of the air. If you Google, so open up your browser and Google impact of fees, SEC, you'll find this same page. The SEC actually has a document that talks about the impact of fees. I'm not going to go into all the details of different fees, but there's marketing fees, administrative fees, investor fees, all these different fees. Right here it says in 20 years, the total amount paid for a 1% annual fee adds up to almost $28,000 for a $100,000 initial investment. So when people talk about, oh, it's only 1% or it's only 1.5% or it's 2%, not a big deal. It's a huge deal when you look at it cumulatively over time. But I want to add one more element to this discussion, and that is what happens to that sequence of returns or that drawdown effect when we start introducing taxes and fees. So now if I lose 10% and I had a gain and I have investment fees, I need 19% to get back. So this 19% is a gain. I'm going to get taxed on that. So that's why I need to get even more than the 11% to get back to zero. If I have a 20% downturn in the market, I need to get to 36%. So you know the story here. And what shocked me is when I get into, like 50% loss in the market, and there have been some times that the S&P index, 500 index has been 47% down, so it's not unheard of. It takes 133% to get back to where I would, my $100. Now, this math was run with a 21% effective tax rate and a 1.5% investment fees. Someone may come and say, well, I don't have that high of a tax rate, or my investment fees are lower. This isn't the point at all. The point I'm just making is that when we think about the sequence of returns and we put in real life elements like taxes and fees, the picture gets even worse. But what I found interesting is if I do the average of all these ups and downs, my average return is 12.67%. And I'm still at $100 in 15 years.
Yeah. Yep. And they get paid whether the markets go up or down.
So, I mean, to what Brian was talking about, don't just look at this number because and Tess called it funny math and creative accounting, and let's look at the real or the cumulative effect. So what's my return if I put in 100 and had 99?
Yeah.
There's one more thing, and then we're going to jump into some other topics, which is I haven't talked about the time to recover. And I just pulled 3 points of historical downturns. So Black Tuesday, October 29th, 1929. We all know that, the Great Depression was going on at that point. So I pulled this out of bankrate.com and I just looked at, what are some of the biggest market crashes in history. And what I was interested in seeing is how long did it take to get back to or to recover? 25 years.
Ooh.
I fell on my chair. I'm like, it was 25 years. But, so the analysis from Bankrate says that when when that crash happened, it took until 1954 to get back to those heights of 1929. Now that's definitely an edge case. That's not normal. But could you imagine even if you're getting close to retirement and something like this happens? Now, October 19th, 1987, a lot of stuff was going on around this time with tax laws changing and, loopholes being closed and capital gains going up, market crashes. So this one was about 2 years. And then the housing bubble or the global financial crisis of 2008 was about a 5-year time. So with all those numbers that I'm showing here, this 30 to 61, what if that took you 5 years? What if that took you 7 years to recover? Anyway, these are just things to know about. Now we've talked a lot about the problems and if you go back and read those books that I had posted up here before, these will offer some of the solutions. Now, can we solve all of the problems? No, because there's some things out of our control, but we can control some of the places our money goes, how we're financing things. And that's what I would encourage you to read, think, and then read some more. So with all of that said, Brian, I know you've got some fancy whiteboards and want
Yeah.
to kind of cover some different topics about investments. So I'm going to stop sharing
Yeah.
and kind of open that up.
Yeah. So obviously, what you guys just saw there, it's a lot of really, powerful information that kind of gives us a background as to what's happening right now, what we're seeing, that kind of stuff. So, like, what's the follow-up question to that? It's like, well, what do I do? What are the opportunities here for the average person? So what we want to look at is kind of, where do you put your money? Because money's coming in, it's losing value, inflation, where does it go? And so we're going to look at some of the more common areas of where you can put your money. And I'm just going to, share my screen. I'm just going to draw it out. We're just going to draw some stuff out here and just have a little bit of fun with this. What's one of the more common thing or vehicles we put our money into? So anybody want to put in the chat box there, what's one of the most common things that when we're working and having money come in, and where do we put that money? What's one of the most common vehicles that we're aware of? House. Yeah, that's it. Typically for most people, that's one of their biggest investments. And I'm going to go through that one in a moment. Bank account, stocks and bonds, 401k. Yeah. So yeah, so let's talk about those. Let's talk about like a 401k. What I want to do is I want to go through the pros and cons of this investment opportunity right here. So this is one of the ones that is very common for a lot of people. 401k. I have an employer. They tell me I should put my money there. I had one when I first got my first job, and they had a company match, all that kind of stuff. So let's look at the pros. What's the pros of a 401k? Kind of use that chat box, guys. Give me some pros of a 401k.
So Brian, I think as we're waiting for people to kind of put some of the pros that they can come up with, one of my thoughts was early on is, so I can just kind of put this on autopilot and not have to think about it. So it's almost like, hey, I got other things to focus on. I got a family to focus on. I got, debts to pay off. I don't want to think about it. So I'm going to give that control over to somebody else.
Yep. You got the
Yep.
match.
Yep, I was gonna say the match.
Yeah, it's automatic. So yeah, so some people say it's forced savings. It forces you to do something that you might not otherwise do. Yeah, so there's the match on there. Someone else said pre-tax. Yeah, so it's pre-tax. That's actually a benefit right there. Some people will say tax deferred is a benefit. So I'm actually going to put that. I'll put tax deferred. So all the growth is deferred for the taxes, so that could be a benefit there.
Well, I was looking at some of the comments, and Brad's got got one that's forced savings. So some people don't have the discipline to do it on their own. So, I guess a pro would be, it's coming right out of your paycheck. So,
Yep,
that could
that's
be
not
a
a bad
benefit.
one. And when I
I
was young,
agree with that. I agree with that, because otherwise you're not doing it.
right.
Right.
Let's talk about what are the cons. What are the cons of a 401k? So same thing, guys. What are the cons of a 401k?
You can't touch it.
Yeah, so that it's you're locked in.
And Tess actually, she said, not being serious, but you can't have access for 30 years. I mean, that can be a pro and that can be a con.
Yep.
For, for some people, that actually might be a good thing that they can't get to it because they would.
Penalties.
Yeah,
Yep.
fees, limited investment options, Charles says.
Yep. Limited options.
Efren says it's an IRS scheme.
Yep. Tax deferred, by the way. Now, why would we say that tax deferred is a con? We just said it's a pro, but it's a con. Well, think of it this way. Who controls the taxes? Well, the IRS does, right? And so when you're working and that money comes in, do you have more deductions today versus in retirement? Well, for most people, when you're working, you have more deductions when you're working, so your tax rate is lower than when you're retired and you have no deductions. So your taxes might go up in retirement, which means the IRS loves you to defer that down the road because they know they're going to make more money when you take the money out. Additionally, do you think taxes are going to be less or more down the road? Yep. So there you go. Fees. Okay. So Craig did a great job of showing you the impact of fees when it comes to building wealth. Well, when you have these fees inside of a 401k, 1% has a massive impact on the future value of your money, because that fee, by the way, compounds the amount that you're not getting the returns on. So it's very scary when you do the math on that. So don't do the math if you don't want to get scared. There you go. Now, the other one that a lot of people talk about, go ahead.
I was gonna say, Robert made a good point too, just the control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So control to me is one of the biggest ones. Control. Do you control when you put your money into the 401k? One, do you control it anymore? To a degree, you can take it out, but you're going to have to abide by the rules and laws of somebody else. That is the IRS, by the way. What does 401k stand for? IRS Section 401-K. So let me ask you a question when it comes to a 401k. Do you think the IRS has your best interest at heart? Do you think they're the best custodian of your money? Do you think they care about you? No, I don't believe they do. In fact, I believe they're one of the worst organizations out there when it comes to responsibility with money. Because what is their job? Their job is to get money for the federal government. So you lose control, you give it to somebody whom you don't believe has the best interest at heart, and yet we give them our money. It makes no logical sense as to why, if you believe the IRS is not good for you, that you give them control of your money. Very, very crazy, right? Very crazy. Okay. Additionally, you're limited as far as investments go. When you have a 401k, you're limited to what the opportunities are with that custodian. And the custodian is the person that manages your 401k. It might only be the stock market. And guess what? That custodian is going to make fees off of what you put your money into, or actually your money is period. So yeah, so limited, tax deferred is not the best. You have fees, you lose control of your money. Penalties if you want to access your own money that you worked for. Makes no sense, by the way. Additionally, the 401k, now this is the interesting thing here. Risk. That's one I didn't see anybody put down, was risk. Now, you can lose your money. You can literally lose your money in a 401k. As Craig showed on the graphs, big crashes, you lose your money. Like that is one of the biggest cons, well, in my opinion, of a 401k. Now, additionally, why does a 401k even exist? This comes to risk, by the way. So not to get into a huge history lesson here, but back in the day, 401k did not exist. In the 80s, it became something that was obviously popular because what happened? Well, before the 401k existed, how did you have retirement? Well, if you had an employer, they had a pension. Yep, there you go, Glenn, reduced pensions right there. Why do they have pensions? Well, for retirement, right? Okay, so here's the thing. Who was taking the risk with a pension? Well, not the employee, by the way. The employer was the one that was responsible for investing the money in the pension. So along comes the 401k. The 401k was originally designed, if you go read the book on it, there's the guy who started it. Can't remember his name. I'm blanking on his name right now.
Hannah.
Andy Tanner, a buddy of mine, he knew the guy personally before he passed away. But they designed it. Yeah, boy, how young 401ks are. They're not that old, by the way. They were designed for highly paid CEOs and executives to hide their bonuses from taxes, or defer that. That's how they were designed originally. Then along come the employer and look at that and they say, wait a second, if I use this thing, I can literally transfer the risk from me to the employee for retirement. This is awesome. Whoa, cool. Along comes the 401k, the employee match, all that stuff. Essentially, it's putting the risk on your shoulders and off of the employers. So let me ask you a question, though. Does that make sense? Because look at all the cons here, though. And are you spending time managing your 401k? No, right? So the 401k literally was a con. People were conned, in my opinion, into the 401k thinking this is the best thing since sliced bread. But in reality, it was employers pushing this thing because it is now the cash cow for the IRS, cash cow for Wall Street. So now I'm not saying it's a bad thing for everybody. It can be a good thing for some people if you understand how it works. You can have solo 401ks, by the way, where you can actually control your 401k into other vehicles outside of Wall Street. So there are some other things that it can be good for, but obviously take this into consideration. So control to me is also one of the biggest ones. Now let's look at another vehicle. What's another investment vehicle out there that people like to put their money into? So one of the most common ones, let's go into this one. Real estate. Real estate is a very common one. Now, what are the pros and cons of real estate? So same thing, guys. What's a pro of real estate when it comes to that as an investment or a place to put your money?
Tax benefits.
Yep. Tax benefits. So there's lots of tax benefits with that. Yep.
I'd say also asset based, like a hard
Appreciation,
asset. Mhm.
tangible. I think I'm
Mhm.
spelling that correctly. So it's a tangible, asset. Um, cash
Okay.
flow.
Mhm.
Someone said passive income, so cash flow. So it can, it's yeah. So someone said it cannot evaporate into thin air. That's a tangible asset. So it's physical, tangible. It's one of the three things that we need for survival, by the way, which is food, clothing, shelter. So it's one of the big threes that we need. It's limited in supply, kind of. I mean, you can always build up, right? But it's limited. So one of the pros about it is that you can do forced appreciation. It's a so one of the things that I like about real estate is it's versatile. Okay,
Which
it's
I love
very
this
versatile,
leverage too, right? You can
yep,
leverage it.
right? It's an asset, you can leverage it, all those kind of things. Um, and the other pro here is control. You have more control over it. Okay, if you own the property, you have control over that asset. You can do things with it, you can rent it, live in it. Um, you can fix it up and sell it. You have control over it. Now, what are some of the cons of real estate? Taxes, control. Do you honestly own the real estate? On paper, you do, but can the government take it from you? Yeah, they can, right? Um, liquidity, it's not considered a liquid asset. Okay. By the way, the 401k, same thing. If it's before 59 and a half, it's not liquid. Okay, that's another good thing. Yeah, laws
Mhm.
and the government. They can make changes that can affect your asset. So repairs, yeah. So repairs, all that kind of stuff. Um, let's see what else.
I'd say gaps in like the rental income as well could be a problem if you don't
Yeah.
plan.
So the one thing I was going to say, the market. Do you control the market? No, you don't. So you can influence the value of your home to a degree, but you cannot 100% control it because the market is the market. So as an example, let's say you said, hey, I want to sell this property. Can you do that? Yeah. So yeah, the income cash flow right there. Liability, yeah, risk. So you can be sued, that kind of stuff. Um, it's a public. So same with so by the way, so the 401k and real estate are public. These
Yeah,
are
what about like
public.
total loss or something, right? Like, I mean, I don't know if that's like in there, but like, let's say like a disaster, I don't know, a
Well,
fire.
if you have like insurance in place, you cannot
Right.
really ever lose the total value of the real estate because it is
Yeah,
the
maybe that would be a
land,
good thing.
whatever. Um, it's leverageable. Yeah, Drew, land will always have value, correct. It always has some value as long as you do it correctly. But yeah, I mean, so there's risk. You can't control a lot of things. Yeah, insurance. Yes, Barbara said, yeah, insurance can be very high, all those kinds of things. Eminent domain, Stephen said that. Yeah, you got to be very careful about that. Someone can come in and take your property. Squatters, we're
I
seeing a
cannot.
lot of that happening right now in the big cities, dem controlled cities, where there's all these squatters taking over properties and the laws are not in your favor. So I said laws. So one of the biggest things is laws are not in the landlord's favors, they're in the renter's favors in most states or most cities, which is not a good thing, by the way. If you want to get value out of your property, guess who you got to go ask? And
The
oftentimes
bank.
you got to ask a
Bank.
bank permission, right? You've got to go to the banks and get their permission to get the value out of your home. That's a HELOC, by the way. Or if you want to sell it, well, maybe somebody comes along with $500,000 cash, which would be awesome. I've had that happen, by the way, before. Very rare. But in most cases, they got to go get a bank's permission to buy the property from you, because then the bank's going to say, oh, well, guess what? You got to fix up this and do that. So control is a big thing for me for real estate. You have control, but something you don't control. So that's real estate. So what's another kind of vehicle where you could put your money into go and talk about? What were some of the other ones? Someone else had some other ones up here, I think. What's
One
another
of them
place?
was your own house was something that came up earlier.
Oh yeah, that's a great one. So your home. by the way, I use home and house very differently. Home and house to me are two different things. So home, okay, let's do some quick pros and cons on that one. Well, pro is that, well, you can live there, right there, right? It can have equity. That is a pro. What are some other pros of a home?
I don't know. You can give it to somebody when you die. Something like, I don't know.
I don't know, because I don't consider a home to be an investment, even though it's for most average families, it's the biggest purchase or investment they have.
Mm-hmm.
And they think that it's going to be part of their net worth. But here's some of the cons of a home.
I would almost put in pro, you could do leverage on it as well.
Yep, that's a good one. Well, I spelled leverage wrong, but there's an A there. Um, so a con, it's not part of your net worth. So if you have a mortgage, you can write the mortgage off. That's so Janet said that one, so I'll put that in there. But it's not part of your net worth, by the way. It is not liquid. It is not a liquid asset, by the way. In order to get like, okay, I want to get, money out of my house. Well, get out of your house and sell it so you don't have a home anymore, right? You can own the structure, not the land. That's a good one. Legacy, kind of, yeah. I mean, yeah, it could be a legacy. You can pass it on. It can be considered an asset for some people, but once again, it's not liquid. Unaware. I'm not sure what that one means. Clint. Taxes. So you can't control taxes on it. You've got to pay taxes. If it breaks down, you got to repair it. There's no landlord's going to repair it for you. Yep, expenses. Yep, there you go. Yep, that's put that down there. So there's pros and cons to a home. Now, a home is sometimes not considered an investment. Okay. So if it's not an investment, then a lot of the stuff doesn't really come into play. Target for lawsuits, yeah. Risk, and you, by the way, you don't 100% control it. Like, it doesn't matter pros and cons. A home, you don't typically control it. So someone said precious metals like gold, man, that's a whole can of worms right there in itself. Because gold is an inflation hedge. I know Charles has mentioned inflation hedge. So, precious metals to me are really, you can put your money there, but for most people, it's a small amount. 5%, 10% of your investment bucket goes to something like precious metals because they're a hedge against something happening in the economy, in the markets. And by the way, Stephen has a great question, right, or a great point there. Do you or anyone want to own a home today? Like, I don't, by the way. I don't own a home. I don't really want to right now. Okay. I just don't want to. I don't want the risk and the stuff associated with it. Now, are there benefits? Yes, I've owned homes before, but I don't currently want to own my personal home. So yeah, interesting. Yeah, and yeah, someone can take it from you, or the value is tied to the markets, all that kind of stuff. Target for lawsuits. Yeah, ranch family in Colorado. Yeah, some people believe it's better to be a renter. It's personal opinions on those things. So, what are some other places you can put money? Now, of course, we're going to talk about infinite banking. Infinite banking is a place you can put your money. There's pros and cons of that as well. And so when you think about,
do you want like a savings account? Like,
you can do, savings or cash.
Savings, CDs, all those types of things would be similar.
So, I mean, pro of that one is it can be considered liquid. It can be considered liquid. What are some other pros of having savings and cash? Access to it. Access is very fast, right? You can go get it very quickly.
How about a guaranteed 0.06%?
I was going to say that, but I'm like, do you want to say that's actually
no.
Hey, I know I'm going to make 0.06%, man.
Yeah.
40 cents for the year.
Yep.
Yeah. So losing value. So that's another thing right there. It's losing value. Okay. It's just losing value. Okay. What's the other cons of it?
Can I put in there, Brian, that it contributes to the fractional reserve system?
Yeah. Fractional reserve banking. By the way, that's a con. I'm gonna put that as a con.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're enabling it.
Yeah. And there's other cons to it. I mean, one is you're losing value. It's a depreciating asset right now with inflation. All these kinds of things. And yeah, Clint, we'll talk about the 508 here in a moment. And then you can interrupt compounded interest too. That's a good one right there. So if you have cash in an account that's earning you a return, and you pull that money out, you lose the compound. So it's essentially, so here's the thing. Here's what I want to get into next. So yeah, you're losing control, by the way. That's the other one I was going to put down is control. If you have to get the bank's permission to get your money, that's kind of crazy. Hey, I want to go take out my $100,000 in cash. Whoa, good luck doing that, by the way. Good luck doing that. Okay? Because they probably won't, that's gonna raise huge red flags. In fact, it might take some time to do that, and they might call the IRS. By the way, they do report those things. So it's public. This is another thing. So it can be considered public. If it's in a bank, it's public. They can call the DEA. Yes, they will do that. That is nuts, by the way. We can get into like cryptocurrency, by the way. So cryptocurrency, pros and cons, same things, guys. You don't control it. Okay. You can put in some stop gaps and stuff in that, but you don't control it. It is volatile. It has to be convertible to fiat currency, by the way. That's the only way that it does have value in that regard. All those things. So one of my points about these things we're talking about is control. When you look at all of these things, do you have control of it? No, you're giving up control to these things. And your money is in one spot. It's in one place at one time. And so let's look at IBC, or infinite banking concept. So obviously we're a little biased with this one, but this is why when you read like the book The Creature from Jekyll Island, or if you ever study Austrian economics, they look at infinite banking as being one of the best tools that's out there to recapture control of your money away from the government and away from banks. So what are pros of IBC? Well, one of the first ones is control. When you are your own bank and you have these policies, you're in control of it to a point, right? What are some other pros? Well, guarantees. Like we all like guarantees. So guess what? Guaranteed right there. Where are you putting your money here? Where your money goes first. Nora said that. Pay yourself first. Yep. Safety. So why would we say safety with infinite banking versus like a bank? Well, how many mutual insurance companies have gone under? Craig?
I don't know of any. I know of one that demutualized, but I don't know of any that went under.
Correct. So in the Great Depression, 9,000 banks go under. Boom, your money's gone. How many insurance companies, mutual back then, went under? 0. How many didn't perform? 0. They paid profit and dividends during the Great Depression. So safety, guarantees, things like that. It's private. So it's a private contract, meaning it's not on your credit report. It's not on the radar of the IRS and the government. It's private. Safety, by the way, it's protected. It's a protected asset. Protection from thieves, exactly, right there. It's protected from lawsuits, court orders. Even the IRS, if you have taxes you're not paying and they sue you, in most states, they cannot go after this asset. That's pretty powerful. Okay.
I would also add, Brian, on the pros that these are non-inflationary type things where if I put my money in a savings account that contributes to the inflation of the money supply, where an insurance company can't inflate the money that they get. So
Correct.
it's non-inflationary.
So I mean they can't take in $1 and lend out 2.
Right.
And by the way, two other things is the insurance companies' cash reserves. They have almost 10 times the reserve a bank has when it comes to what they've taken in or what they've got to pay out. They are extremely cash heavy. They are very good at investing because they've paid dividends every year for typically since they've been created. Yeah, so that's one of the best pros. You can put your money in 2 places at the same time. So when you have cash value policies, which is what we focus on, when you have that cash value earning you guarantees or 5% dividends, and you have that money also in a second place, call it real estate or something else where you have control of the asset, you now are doing both of the things. So the things we talked about, you're doing those to build wealth at the same time you're doing infinite banking. So you're doing 2 things at the same time with your dollar, meaning your dollar is working harder for you than if you just put it in like real estate or a house or something like that. Generational wealth. Think about a real estate. Think about a 401k. Think about Bitcoin or any of those other things. How much generational wealth do you have day one when you buy that asset or you put your money into that asset? Well, typically you have what you put into it. That's it. You put $1,000 into a 401k, it has $1,000 of value. Okay. If you put it into a home, same thing. you leverage it or whatever it is, you got to pay that down. It's going to have that kind of value. So it only has what you put into it. When something happens to you, let's say you graduate, typically that's when you pass away, then that asset is going to go through probate or an estate, which is going to suck more wealth out of it. With infinite banking, one reason why we like this is day one, you have guaranteed generational wealth passed on tax-free outside of probate. That is a huge value that no other asset I know of has. So one of the reasons why we like that is guaranteed generational wealth. There's a lot more pros, by the way, but let's because I know we're getting kind of tight on time, and I want to answer some questions because we got some questions that have come in. So let's talk about some of the cons with infinite banking. So what are some of the cons? So I know, Teresa, you've been doing this test, you've been doing this quite some time. Lucy, any cons that you would look at infinite banking?
I don't, so Brian, I don't necessarily look at this as a con because I do infinite banking for the long term, but it takes time to capitalize. It takes time to get the policy efficient to where we're getting more than we're putting in. A lot of people don't like that, but it's part of the equation.
Yeah, so someone said the time it takes to get a policy, yeah, it's 4 to 8 weeks, usually for most people, sometimes shorter, sometimes longer. You have to qualify, from a financial and a medical perspective, you've got to qualify. Access to it. So you may hear about it, but where do you go to get it? And there's so much confusion out there, so many people saying the wrong things. So when Craig put that quote up, at the very beginning, that applies to this. There are so many people saying the wrong things out there and trying to lead people other directions by using infinite banking as the kind of the podium, so to speak. Hugh said admin fees. So Craig, what would you say to that one?
I mean, there's no doubt there are costs inside of a whole life policy, and it's one of those things when you view an illustration, you will see those costs built in. So there's operations of the company, there's commissions, there's the insurance company is not a not for profit or nonprofit. So where we can see those is in the illustration. When you put in, say, 10,000 and you have access to, let's say, 7,200, that there's cost built in there, because you kind of think of it from this way too. If I'm putting in $10,000 in a life insurance contract and I immediately have, let's say, 250,000 of death benefit, who's kind of carrying on all the risk right there in the early years?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's a cost to that, and it's something that you can see inside of the illustration. But yeah, they're there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not free.
Correct. Yeah. So, and by the way, there's the cool thing about infinite banking is the fees are all built into it, by the way, too. So unlike a 401k, when it's behind the scenes, with infinite banking, it's typically built in. And so you don't really see them, and how they don't change your numbers. That's kind of one of the nice things about it. I'm going to say premium deposits. So like a 401k, you can stop putting money into a 401k and it just sits there. Okay. With an infinite banking policy, you got to understand that you're going to want to put money towards this for a certain period of time to make it, efficient. Call it 7 years. So you've got to have that kind of commitment to putting money towards this. It is flexible, but that's one of the the cons for some people is they say, well, what if something happens down the road? And we can help you understand that. To access the money. So it's not, within 24 hours, it's about 3 days, business days, usually, to access the money. And it's a loan provision. So it's money you're borrowing from your own policy without losing the compounding and guarantees and all that stuff on the left hand, or all the pros. But yeah, you've got to go and get it from the insurance company. It's, by the way, a guaranteed loan. You don't have to ask permission. You just say, hey, give me my money, and they give it to you, essentially. Okay. But you've got to use that loan provision to access the money. Okay. And then, yeah, and Tess said a great thing here is that the pros, when you look at the bigger picture and you kind of zoom out, the cons almost go away. If you zero in on like the first 6 months or 12 months, yes, there's going to be cons, but when you zoom back out again, they kind of go away. So yeah, it's a long-term focus. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Boyd, great. That's right there. That's probably one of my favorite ones. You have to be a responsible banker. You would be shocked at how many people that I talk to that have an infinite banking policy in place. Their uncle, their mom's, insurance person put it in place, but they have no idea how to use it or what it even means. And so they're not being given the education, which is why, we hear with, Chris and the money multiplier and Chris Naugle, why we teach so much stuff like we're doing right now, because the more that you know about infinite banking and how money works, the more responsible and better you can be with that dollar. Yes, Ephraim said it. A pro also is that when you use this concept is that, the principal is not lowered. Your cash value does not go down. It does not stop earning the 5% or whatever it is at that time, does not stop earning that. It keeps going up. Yet you've also leveraged the money into another asset. Like that's crazy to think about that. Yeah, so that's one of the big benefits right there. Compound interest, tax-free. And by the way, you can use this another that's over here, by the way. Taxes. So infinite banking grows tax-free. Now, what's that mean though? Well, when you borrow from the policy via the loan provision, are loans taxable? No, they're not. Okay. So let's say you want to take that money back out in retirement and go do something with it and not pay it back. That's up to you. That is a strategy, but you don't pay taxes on it. So one of the biggest pros with infinite banking is that you're in control of that money. You're controlling the money. You control if you want to pay taxes or not on it, by the way. That's a pretty cool thing. It's why the IRS, in my opinion, does not like this concept. It takes control away from them. Okay. And that money grows tax-free and is passed on tax-free. I like that phrase, tax-free, by the way. I can just keep saying it. So guys, to kind of conclude here, what I wanted to do is just kind of go through some of the areas where you can put your money. And so the first ones, we talked about pros and cons. We talked about real estate. We talked about a 401k, the markets, right? We talked about your home, investment properties, cryptocurrencies, all of these things. You can put your money into those things. Okay. I'm not saying you shouldn't, by the way, but just understand the pros and cons and the control that you have. Here's the thing though, where your money goes first is so powerful because you can do all those things at the exact same time you're doing infinite banking. What do I mean? Well, as Tess, I think, said it, where your money goes first. Imagine flowing your money through infinite banking first. Keep in mind what Craig talked about at the beginning of the presentation. What's happening behind the scenes right now is taking control away from you. Putting your money through infinite banking puts you in the driver's seat. And then you can go do all the other things we talked about to build wealth. So it's not one or the other, it's both at the same time. That is one of the things that is very powerful about infinite banking is it's understand the pros and cons, make sure it's a fit for you. And if you want to go do something else, we didn't even talk about buying cars and going on vacation and buying other things. You can use your money here to go do those other things. So with all the chaos around us in the world right now, all the stuff happening, having control of your money and having it safe, two very powerful things. Infinite banking does that for you. But keep in mind, there are pros and cons to everything you do. Yeah, so Tessa, 2 of my policy have now entered year 4, and a third will enter in next 60 days. That's awesome. I love hearing that.
So,
Cool.
so Brian, as we kind of get close to the wrap-up period, we got a couple minutes left here. And Sean, I know you posted the booking link as well. So here's kind of what I would say as a wrap-up, and I really like what Robert Sweeper put in, takeaways from the meeting, read the Infinite Banking book. And that's what we'd really encourage is read the book. We've got presentations on the YouTube channel. We call it a 90-minute presentation, but it goes over some of the history and the use cases of infinite banking. But when you're ready to have an in-depth conversation, we have money mentors, Brian, does those types of calls. We have others on the team. And really what those calls are about is understanding your specific needs and how infinite banking can be aligned with that. So I'd say as next steps, do some education, read the books if you haven't, schedule a call with the money mentors and just talk more about your specific situation. And then from there, you can kind of start getting plugged in here.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Ask questions, by the way, too. So I see some we have in here. We'll get into them. Someone said here, anonymous, said, I may lose my home to foreclosure on July 8th. My finances are a mess. So when it comes to infinite banking, I will say that is one of the pros / cons is you have to be financially responsible with your money to get into it. If your situation is kind of a mess financially, I would focus on fixing that, getting it cleaned up so that you can then do infinite banking. Now, if you have good solid income, money coming in, and you've got debt that is kind of, you feel like you're like, oh my gosh, I got so much debt. I'm paying it off, but it's just going to take forever. Infinite banking one of the biggest pros is that it can recapture that debt back into your control. So that's an amazing thing right there that it can do. Steven said, how is this different than what Decentralized Masters is doing, helping folks become their own bank? So I don't know who that is, but they might be talking about infinite banking. So we're not the only ones out there talking about it, by the way. So they could be talking about, infinite banking, but yeah, decentralizing banks, which is kind of what people talk with Bitcoin. They talk about it with potential infinite banking is a term I've heard before, but because yeah, the centralized banking system is what the fractional reserve banking is, centralized banking. And so yeah, so this actually takes that control away from them and puts it into your hands.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, Brian, what you had mentioned. There's, we meet people at different points in their financial journey. Some people have debts, some people don't have debts, they have money, they don't know what to do with it. Some people want to get investing. So there's lots of different entry points into the infinite banking process, but it does require you having the ability to put money into the system that you would otherwise be putting in savings in other places. And then you just start building that system up so that you can buy things more efficiently. So if you have a car purchase, why would you want to give that money and all the finance charges to the bank when you can put it in your own system? So
yeah.
But those are the types of things that we can, the money mentors during those calls can meet with you and really understand your specific needs. So
yeah, and so I mean, it can be worth a call. Just the links in there are mentors, beyourownbanker.com. You can also reach out to me too. Yeah, just have a conversation. And then if Rain said, are the interest on the loans tax deductible? In most cases, yes, they are, by the way. So if you're borrowing from your policy, depends on how you're doing it, by the way. So if you're borrowing from your policy and going and buying a car, is the interest tax deductible, Craig?
So I'm trying to understand the question. Are they asking if policy loans are tax deductible? Because policy loans are not tax deductible. They used to be, but they're not any longer.
Correct. So here's the way I look at it. So this is not tax advice. I'm not a CPA. But if you borrow from a policy and go buy a car and you're paying your loan back to your own infinite banking policy with interest, well, that's not a taxable deduction or tax deduction on that interest. If you're borrowing from your policy, putting it into an entity, and then loaning that money out, then having that money coming back and then paying back that loan, then that interest can be deductible, in my experience. So it depends on what you're doing with the money that can make it tax deductible. We're talking about the interest on the loans back to your bank.
Yeah. And I think Boyd hit it on the
Correct.
head. It's one of those things where I would ask your CPA in your specific situation, because as you take money out of the policy, loan it to your business now has a deduction, but that money coming back to you personally can be income. So it's just some of those things that you kind of have to work out with your CPA, but that's certainly going to give you more control on how those loans get paid back, the how and when and how much. So that's really what we've been talking about.
If possible, could you go over how to grow funds behind a 508 entity tax-free? I'm not too familiar with 508 entities. I know what they are, of course. That's for charities in most cases. So I would strongly recommend going and talking to a tax person or a CPA that understands 508 entities. Now, if you're talking about how to grow funds with infinite banking, yeah, there's people doing 508 entities that can own policies, be the beneficiaries of infinite banking policies all the time. Those entities can fund the infinite banking policy if there's a key employee or they want to fund partners. Yeah, you can do that. Now, in most cases, though, those aren't tax deductions for a business, but I'm not sure how that applies to a 508. Just being honest, I don't know how infinite banking premiums deposits are looked at when it comes to a 508 if the 508 is the owner. Do you know, Craig? I'm not.
So it depends really on the type of, there's kind of an umbrella called corporate owned life insurance that would fall into that category. And there's different pillars under there. There's executive bonus, there's key person, there's non-qualified deferred comp. So there's a lot of different strategies that can fall inside of a corporate structure. And depending on what that plan is, there are some cases where you can get some tax advantages to pay the premiums. In some cases not. So we'd really need to understand what's the entity, who are the players in it. We need to put a case together for why there's a potential need to have a insurance policy inside of that entity.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I
it's,
mean, we have people doing it. So
yeah.
um,
I think Clint asked the same question, can an entity be its own bank? And that's exactly what we're talking about is if you have a business, those are the corporate owned life insurance policies. And that's really where we get into putting a case together. So let's say Brian and I had a business together and we could do a buy-sell agreement where I don't necessarily know Brian's wife and he doesn't know my family and whatnot. So I don't know if I want to go into business with him. So we'd want to put a structure together where if God forbid something happens to Brian, then we can pay out his family and I take over the ownership of the business. So there are different structures out there, but it just really requires having a conversation so we know more about what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. But the bottom line on that one, Clint, too, as well, is that when it comes to an infinite banking, by the way, the insured has to be a human body, a human person. So that can't be a business, but the beneficiary and the owner can be an entity.
Yeah.
So your entity, essentially, let's say you're operating your own business, maybe with your spouse or whatever it is, and you say, I want to have my infinite banking policy be the bank for my business. You can do that. And so your business would fund the policy and then borrow from it as its own line of credit, essentially. So we've got people that have like e-commerce businesses or they're doing whatever with their business, and they'll have a policy set up that's funded by their business so they can act as their own line of credit. At the same time, they're building this asset, infinite banking, that can be used for retirement functions down the road. So and by the way, this happened. This was a conversation. Someone said, oh, I'm thinking of doing a 401k with my entity for my business so I can start taking money and putting it into retirement. But the person, they were very nervous about a 401k. They didn't feel comfortable with it. It didn't feel right. They said, why would I do that? I wouldn't go get a job and do a 401k, but what do I do with my business? And so essentially they're doing this. They're doing infinite banking. They're going to use that to grow the business and then eventually use that infinite banking policy to then go acquire other assets for retirement, such as real estate or other investments. So yeah, so it can be a multifaceted approach for a business.
Yeah, and I guess just to wrap up, for those that may be new to our community, so Wednesdays, we've got a number of shows. In the morning is the WTF, then we do this wealth webinar. Today and every week on Wednesdays at 4:30 Eastern, we do another show called Ask Me Anything. So if you're available, we'd love to have you join us. Brian, myself, Shauna, the rest of the team will be there. And really, it's just a forum. If you come and have questions, you can post questions. Our whole group kind of talks about it, and in that way, if you want to see us again today, we'll be on Ask Me Anything at 4:30 Eastern.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining today, and hope you found this valuable. And definitely do your homework, read those books we talked about, get educated, think about this stuff. Because it not only gives you more control in what you're doing, but it also kind of gives you the ability to kind of unplug as much as we can from that fractional reserve system and that, the system that's kind of causing that squish, the great American squish, as we call it.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. All right, everybody.
All right.
Thanks so much, and we'll see you in the next one.
All right. Thank you all.
All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed that episode. We're putting up tons of them, but I think if you like this one, you'll probably like that video as well. Not only that, I've got a book that I created, Mapping Out the Millionaire Mystery, where we actually show you what the wealthy do in the game they play with money. I want you to have that for free. And if you want to know about all my new videos coming up, click that alert button. Actually, smash that alert button, and you'll be notified every time we put a new video. So we'll see you on the next episode.